Yeah, it goes.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Freight Caviar Podcast. Today, we have a very special guest for you, Doug Estrada, the Senior Director and Regional Transportation at Walmart. Doug, thank you so much for taking your time to be on the show today.
Thank you for letting me be here. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So definitely, Doug, I want to get the point of view of from the shipper side. It's something that I've been interested in for a while. Being a freight broker for 6 years, I want to see how you see the logistics, and especially being a Walmart, you're shipping a lot. If you could tell us maybe a little bit about yourself, an introduction, and I know that you also are an advisory board member at Trucking Against Trafficking. So if you could talk about that for a little bit as well, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. So I appreciate it, Paul. So I've been in the industry a little over 30 years. I started my career for the old timers back in Chicago for Carolina freight carriers. Right out of college, started working on the docks with them. So I worked in the LTL industry for about 12 years, and then came over on the shipper side with Walmart back in 2001, 2002. And so I've been here with the Walmart private fleet for the last 20 years. When I started with the company here in Walmart, it was really in a big growth stage of the company where at that time we were just moving into the grocery environment, moving out of the just general merchandise. And so we were just building distribution centers like mad, right? So every year for about 15 years, we're building 3 to 4 distribution centers, 300 to 400 stores every single year. So just a lot of growth during that time frame. And so in that time frame, working with the Walmart private fleet, we saw the growth of the Walmart private fleet in combination with the growth of using outside carriers, not only to support our outbound business, but the growth on the inbound business as well. And then you see that diversification into a lot of overseas operations, intermodal operations. And so now that we're into the next phase of the business is e-commerce. And so how do we integrate the e-commerce into what our brick and mortar stores are today? So that's a little bit about me. So right now I actually have oversight over 17 distribution centers that sit in the upper Midwest of the United States, roughly 2,000 Walmart private fleet drivers, another 400 or 500 dedicated drivers solely responsible for the outbound side of the business. At the same time, we use that inbound to, offset the empty miles piece. In regards to Truckers Against Trafficking, this is one of those things we're really proud to represent Truckers Against Trafficking in their advisory board. And so I work really directly with the CEOs of Truckers Against Trafficking, advising them how we can more broadly educate the trucking environment in the United States in regards to how to stop the trafficking of human beings. It's been a very big education piece for me, just in the small Northwest Arkansas community that I live in here. Once you go through the education, you just really get exposed to how much human trafficking takes place out there. And it's not just on the southern border, it's on all the borders, and then just things that take place locally. And so educating the driver group, because we think they have the greatest exposure to seeing trafficking that takes place out on the roads, whether it's at truck stops, at stores where they are making deliveries or breaking it overnight. There's just a big exposure to it. So that's where I kind of work with them on and how to help educate the environment.
That's amazing. I don't know much about the trafficking statistics. Could you share with us, Doug, some stats, like in terms of how many people are trafficked in the United States?
I don't know that I actually have that number, but I'll tell you it's pretty big. One of the things that I've been working with Truckers Against Trafficking, TAT, we've been going to the United Nations and sitting on some of their boards, trying to educate all around the movement from Europe back into the United States, the movement from the southern border, particularly out of Central America, the amount of trafficking that takes place there. And it's a number of things, right? It's not just people from a sex standpoint, but it's also just slavery that's actually taking place today, people being sold into that type of environment. So I can't really give you any statistics off the top of my head, but it's one of those things that we're really focused on trying to address.
Yeah, It's definitely a big issue that I feel like isn't really talked about that much. Like sometimes you see a video of a trailer full of like a large group of people being trafficked, but besides that, I don't know much more about it, and definitely is a serious issue. So
Yep.
I definitely I think that's an important topic and should be discussed more about in the logistics industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Doug, in terms of transportation, you have the Walmart private fleet that you handle, and then you also have other service providers of transportation. I mean, I'm guessing overall you probably get a lot of people trying to solicit business from you and from Walmart. Is that right?
That would be an understatement. Yeah, a lot.
So with you being in the industry for like you said 30 years?
Yep.
Okay. Is it like every year more and more people are trying to solicit business? Because there has been an influx of freight brokers on the market. I'm wondering are you being constantly just progressively more bombarded?
Yeah, and I think with the social formats that are out there today, like LinkedIn, I mean, there's just a ton of people using that from a sales standpoint, which they should, right? And so that's just really increased. You know, it used to be the old cold calls. People would pull their bills of lading and they'd come make a cold call to you, and then you'd have that familiarity with them. But now, because of social media, I mean, everybody has exposure to who you are, what you have control over. And so not only do you get the phone calls, right, but you just get inundated with the emails, whether it's directly or off the social media type devices. So there's a lot going on out there in regards to it. So it's in some cases it's kind of hard to handle some of it.
I could imagine. I mean, I was talking yesterday to the VP of the supply chain of a small shipper, and he was telling me that he just keeps constantly getting spammed, and you know, he might respond to like every like 5th email saying, "Hey, sorry, like I'm already taken care of." But like, what's your approach? Do you just try to like delete them all and move on?
Well, it depends on the time of the year, right? I mean, so there's, you know, obviously different spikes in different times of the year, different capacity concerns, and then just what's going on with other carriers that you're using. You know, if you're having carriers that are having problems and it's not resolving the service needs that you have, and you may be on the hunt for somebody else. And so one of the things I really take a lot of time to look for is the history of the carrier, the history of the person, whether they're asset based or not asset based is a big issue for us. Not so much in and I'll tell you, on my side, on the private fleet side, we use a lot of power only support, right? And so just their ability to service those areas, and then their ability to operate in the timeframes that we operate in. And I'm speaking specifically more on the outbound side of the business, right? So we have certain delivery windows at the stores, certain delivery windows within our own e-commerce environments, and their ability to operate in those areas. And so a company that could come back and provide the needs that we have, that's what we're looking for. And I think the biggest thing that really impacts the company is you'll get a broker, you'll get a small carrier come in and call you and say, I have like 20 or 30 trucks. Can you use me? And typically within the Walmart environment, when I'm needing trucks, I'm needing like 300, 400, 500 trucks. And so if they don't have that mass quantity, you know, when it comes down to it, I'm going to go with one that's going to provide me more consistent, higher number of trucks.
Totally. I definitely understand that. I've talked to a few people and they echoed the same thing. It's just, you'd rather go to one broker that could cover all your freight, or one trucking company that's got a large fleet, than have to deal with 10 smaller ones. Because that's just a lot. Like, what would you say, Doug, are like maybe like some pain points that you're dealing with currently in terms of transportation?
So it would vary by business segment, right? So, you know, in the brick and mortar, general merchandise, grocery deliveries type things, there's that driver capacity issue that's sitting out there. And so having enough driver capacity to support the work environment that we have today. I would say the one thing about COVID is COVID not only has impacted us from an overall driver capacity standpoint, but we've also seen the increase in the home deliveries, online grocery selections from the customers. And so those type of things have really increased our need to be more time sensitive around perishable deliveries. And so the capacity just to overall support that. The other business segments would be those longer haul type refrigerated loads that, you have your food markets that sit out in California, Southern Texas, Florida, and then just getting that move from one end of the country to the other end where you have the need for it. So driver capacity, whether you define it in general merchandise, perishable food, e-commerce. I mean, it's just a big deal right now.
Sure. Have you felt any differences in the market ever since the war broke out in Ukraine?
I can't say that we've seen any supply chain issues here domestically that's been impacted by that right now. I know that there's a lot of impacts to fuel. Walmart's one of those companies where we typically buy the fuel futures. And so the fuel we're using today is something that we probably bought months ago, right? So probably in the upcoming future, we'll probably feel some pain points in regards to fuel prices.
Okay. I know that brokers right now are really putting rates down on the carriers because carriers have been demanding extremely high rates for quite some time. And right now, brokers feel like a little bit, some light, I guess, air, maybe just they're able to push the rates down at the current moment due to the fact there's less freight on the market. And it seems like it might be a little bit to do with what's going on in Ukraine. Has to do with a few factors in general, but it seems like shippers aren't shipping as much as they were before the war began. That's just kind of like an insight I've seen.
Well, I would think in some ways, as prices go up, inflation goes up on the retail side, you're going to probably see the amount of retail go down, right? And so the demand for product is probably going to go down. But at the same time, in the trucking industry, historically, we always kind of see the impacts months ahead of time, right? So if you see any inflationary pressures, if you see any supply chain pressures, we've probably already felt it for months before it actually hits the airwaves. And right now, I would say the war in Ukraine is probably unique in that because of the timing when it hit, I don't know that it's had enough time to translate over to what we're seeing. But I can tell you as a shipper right now, again, we've kind of insulated ourselves a little bit because we buy that fuel typically, months ahead of time. But I would think in the near future, as fuel prices continue to increase, we're going to start to feel it.
Sure. Doug, and you did mention earlier about how COVID changed the delivery to kind of being more at home. And I wanted to see if what kind of changes is Walmart taking to ensure a smoother delivery at home, and what you're talking about earlier, like what kind of changes are taking place? Yeah,
so just there's a lot of that technology that's going on out there right now, right? And so I can tell you, Walmart has looked into. We're actually here in Arkansas testing the drone deliveries. So if you're out in Pea Ridge, Arkansas, you can probably see a couple of drone deliveries from the store to some people's homes out there. So you can start to see that process taking place. We have some electric autonomous vehicles that we're also testing in certain places. Walmart's using if you're a Walmart Plus customer, you have the ability to schedule in-home delivery. That's one of those new things, right, where you get it delivered right into your fridge. But I can tell you on the front end of it, on that first mile, middle mile piece, we're really focused on the increased on-time delivery into the stores so they can get those items picked and available for the customer. And so that's where our greatest focus is right now. Not so much on the last mile, because you're seeing some different impacts in the last mile, right? So a lot of people would prefer to come pick it up versus you come to their house, just from a security standpoint. So we're really focused on that middle mile, second mile delivery from a timeliness standpoint.
Okay. And you did mention the autonomous electric vehicle. And I know a lot of the large publicly traded companies are taking a big stance on being greener, which also, well, it's more expensive to be green because you have to invest into ensuring that you have carriers and transportation providers that are actually providing greener options. So what's Walmart's stance on the green initiative, and what other steps are they taking besides just having electric vehicles?
Yeah, so if you go to the walmart.com website, you can actually go on and look from a sustainability standpoint to see the initiatives that we're going after. But as a company as a whole, you can imagine we have a pretty big footprint, right, in a number of different areas. And so by 2035, we're aiming to be completely free of any waste coming out of any of our buildings. We have a projection to be all out of fossil fuels with our trucks by 2035. And so those two big initiatives right there, you can imagine the amount of miles that Walmart with its own private fleet, what we run, that's a pretty big initiative. And then as we continue to get into the last mile deliveries, home deliveries, using the electric vehicles, the autonomous vehicles, of course, those are much smaller panel vans, electric cars, those type of things. So Walmart's taking a pretty good stance on being sustainable.
Yeah, definitely. I've heard that a lot of large companies that they're doing it, they want to be greener. And I have actually a question that has slipped my mind about that, but I might return to that in a second. And in terms of, actually, I got the question. So with the green initiative, like, are you maybe working with any specific transportation companies that are green? Do you have any specific requirements for them? And like, what does that look like? Like, if I know Covenant Transportation has been a really green, has a really strong green initiative. So I'm wondering if like Walmart has worked with any of those like large trucking companies that do have large green initiatives.
So, we work with about every type of transportation company that's out there today, right? And, you pick and choose and use a number of different criteria, whether it's rate related or service related, but we do take into account, their sustainability efforts. Our own trucks, for years, I think we were the first ones to put APUs that would have no idle allowed on their Class A trucks. And so almost every truck that comes on our yard, we have no idle policy. So every company that we work with has to be able to meet that no idle policy when they come on to a Walmart distribution center. And when you have 95 plus distribution centers out there, I mean, that's a lot. So it is one of the criteria. Now we're working with Tesla on some of the trucks that they're trying to design for us from a Class A standpoint. Our Canadian leg of transportation has already taken receipt of some of those. Couldn't tell you the detail behind how they're using those trucks. I know we're still working through it here on the process domestically in the United States. Still haven't been able to use any of those Class A trucks, but we've seen a couple, tested a couple, but don't have any in operation right now.
Okay. It's interesting to see the progression. It's something that I've been tracking because I'm friends with I've talked to a few times the VP of Sustainability at Covenant, and I think it's a fascinating topic. And people who are transportation providers that are ahead of this could utilize it to be a little bit niche in the market for it, because a lot of companies are going to be continuing to be more and more green. So it's good to see that Walmart's taking a strong stance on that. And if anyone's interested in learning more, they should go to walmart.com and click the sustainability tab. But Doug, I wanted to actually focus now on what are like some pet peeves that you deal with, or what are your biggest pet peeves when it comes to dealing with transportation providers?
I think the biggest one out there is the ones that don't do their homework in regards to before they make a call, right? Or they send you the spam email or the probing email, and it doesn't show that they've taken the time to educate themselves about the company. Having worked in the LTL industry before becoming a shipper, I know what the sales piece of that side of the business is. I know how competitive it is. And you always knew who your good sales reps were and the bad sales were just based upon how they educated themselves before they went into the customer. And so a lot of times I'll get a lot of emails around, hey, do you want to track your business? Do you know how to track your product? Do you want to use warehousing? And it tells me right there, you never heard of Walmart before? I mean, 90% of the population lives within 10 miles of a Walmart store. And so you would think that they would go out and investigate, okay, Walmart has 95 plus distribution centers, most of them within 2 million square feet or greater size. So warehousing is probably not going to be something that we're going to want to do. They can go out there and look at a 10K for Walmart and see how much does Walmart spend annually in transportation. And you can see in there it varies from $8 to $10 billion a year in transportation spend. And so there's going to be a lot of things that they're going to need to take time to educate themselves on, that I can't go in and make a cold call on the largest company in the world the same way I would with a mom and pop or a guy that's needing LTL or a truck every 2 weeks, right? And so there's a big gap and there's a big difference in that. And I think that's probably the biggest piece, where brand new, ambitious salesman says, you know what, I'm going to go get this Walmart company. I've heard of them. And yet they've not taken the time to do that. So most of the time, the people that will call on a company the size of Walmart, you're probably going to have a national rep. You're going to really have your homework down in regards to what kind of company you are, what kind of carrier, what kind of assets you have, all those things, because we're going to go through and just scrub that whole thing first to make sure that we have, you're going to meet that minimum requirement. So, but that would be my biggest pet peeve when it comes to the sales pieces.
Okay. And then to follow up on that, do you have like any horror story, or like, do you have like any story in mind, like the worst experience that you've had dealing with a transportation provider?
Well, I'm not going to name any names.
Of course,
right? I won't
no
name
names.
any names, but I will tell you that there was periodically we'll pull up some of these locations where it'll be open for a short amount of time, but you need a carrier to come in and provide the assets to make all the moves out of here. And the carrier says, hey, I can provide you 100 trucks. Okay, need those 100 trucks. Here's when I need them, and here's where we're going to do, and here's how it's got to go by. And we've had some of these main big events, you can imagine from a Walmart standpoint, where the carrier did not have the 100 trucks that they said they were going to have. They had like 5, right? So we're trying to broker out all this other kind of work, and they just couldn't do it. And you are trying to start shipping to a customer base like Walmart has, and you got a carrier that can't provide you the trucks that they said they would. And so that's really what pushes us down the path of going after asset-based companies where they can validate and show us exactly what they've had, because we've been burned a couple times in that type of format. So whether it's moving 100 loads of flowers for Mother's Day or Valentine's Day, or you got the big 4th of July cookouts taking place, or the Christmas surge, we've had those number of times of experience. I can tell you over my 20 years with Walmart where it's happened. So that's probably the biggest, without naming names, but it's happened more than once.
Okay. It's fascinating and interesting to see it from the shipper perspective. And yesterday when I was talking to a shipper, he said that brokers are a punching bag. That's what he said. And he said, well, he used to be a broker before he became in charge of the shipper. And it was interesting because he said brokers aren't going away because shippers will need them. There might be some efficiencies created through technology, but when you need a specific requirement, like for you, Doug, it was like 100 trucks. I don't see like in the foreseeable future where a technology platform might make it more efficient, might make it quicker in booking, but that broker will still be needed to arrange transportation and to deal with any issues that arise. But I wanted to see, maybe get your perspective on technology, and what kind of technology is Walmart utilizing right now to make their logistics more efficient? And what kind of changes do you foresee taking place potentially in the future that might create some drastic changes?
I wouldn't say drastic changes. I'm saying, for our use of outside trucks, typically when we have a truck, we're going to want to get full use of that truck as much as we possibly can, right? And so now there has to continue to be that separation between Walmart dispatching the truck and the owner of that company, or the owner of that truck dispatching that truck, right? So how do you get that information to them quicker in regards to making load availability? So one of the things that we're testing in the market today is an app that goes on a driver's phone that will actually send the load directly to him and to his dispatcher, that will help us use that truck quicker, whether it's from a asset-owned carrier or a broker, but getting that app into their hands so they have visibility to our loads quicker, to the work that we have available, and then thus getting it from point A to point B quicker. So that's the biggest thing we're working on in regards to the outside. Internally, again, it's the same thing. Using a lot of geofencing and how we're tracking our freight, trying to get more visibility to on-time delivery windows, so that way our store assets can plan for that delivery, as well as how we can plan and utilize our capacity better.
Okay. So with that application, Doug, is that a Walmart made app?
It will be, yes.
Okay.
And it's not brand new to the industry, right? I think you can go out there and there's several retailers. I think you use third-party carriers. I think Target has one. I think Kroger has one. So there's a couple of different other ones that are using that same type of technology.
Sure. It's interesting to hear. And Doug, since this just happened yesterday, I do want to get some insights on the Plainfield, Indiana, DC, the burn down. Could you tell us maybe like what happened, and what are like the after effects that you're feeling today?
Well, at a very high level, that Plainfield building is one of our e-commerce sortation buildings. I think they're still investigating, but it looks like it might have been one of the sorters that might have caught on fire that started the building on fire. And so there's a large amount of orders that were in there that we quickly shifted, because of the size of our network, they've shifted to some buildings around it. But that building will be a complete loss. Some of the pictures that you can see out on social media today, you can see in some of the newspapers, it was a total loss in that building. And so I know there's still a lot of investigation going on from the local fire marshal. So not a lot we can share in regards to what really caused it. But I can tell you that we've, fortunately enough, because of the size of our network, we're able to shift the orders that were going through there to different locations and keep it going to the customer. So it should have very minimal, if any, impact to the end customer.
Well, I guess that's a good thing to hear. Bad, sad story, but Doug, how many shipments does your team and your region handle per day?
From an outbound delivery standpoint, of the 17, 19 buildings that I have in the region, we'll probably make about 12,000 deliveries outbound every single day. And then we'll make that same kind of, maybe half that, if 3/4 of that, we'll pick up a backhaul back into the distribution centers too.
Okay. It's amazing. It's Walmart has such massive logistics.
I'll give you this kind of a size and scope story of Walmart, of a story that happened several years ago. There were some riots that took place in Baltimore, and we were using some outside carriers that were making grocery deliveries into there. And one of the things we did is the outside carrier that was supporting those deliveries, grocery deliveries into the Baltimore store market, said, hey, we're not going to deliver in there until the riots are over. but we knew there was still a need for the customer. And so the Walmart private fleet moved in and we started to make those deliveries from the Walmart private fleet standpoint. And so for 3 days, there's 26 stores in that Baltimore metro area. For those 3 days, the Walmart private fleet made deliveries into those stores. And once it was all over, the CEO of the company sent me a note, said, hey, I'd like to write a note to every one of the drivers that made deliveries in there and personally thank them for, risking themselves, their commitment to the company, the commitment to the customer. And so, could you send me the list of the drivers that made deliveries into Baltimore? I said, sure. So I had them pull it. I sent it to his assistant and she called me back. She said, hey, there's 300 drivers' names on this list. It was only 3 days. And I said, yeah, a normal Walmart store will get between 9 and 10 deliveries every single day. And so when you take that times the 28 stores, I mean, it's about 300 deliveries in a 3-day period that a Walmart store will get a delivery. So it's pretty massive at times.
Oh, definitely. It's so interesting to talk, Doug. And since I am coming from a freight broker background, and since a large part of my audience is freight brokers, I was wondering what kind of tips could you potentially provide or would you give to a freight broker that wants to do business with Walmart or any large shipper for that matter?
Yeah, I think you want to be really good about telling your story of your company and where you have an actual history of, here's my assets that I can utilize. Here's how available that I can make them. Here's the network that I can support, and be really good and confident and show the examples behind your history as a broker in those areas. Because it's really, really hard based upon the competition and where your competition is going to come in. They're going to have that established history. And if they can do that and show that good history and show the amount of assets that you have, specifically with a company like Walmart, you're going to have a pretty good size amount of assets. A 5 or 10 truck, 20 truck, 30 truck, probably not going to make it.
Yeah, definitely. And then I would probably say this is like one of my final questions would be, I know we touched on this topic earlier where I was asking you what kind of issues Walmart has at the current moment. I'm wondering from like a standpoint of like dry vans, power only, drop trailer, flatbed, out of the main kind of like truckload components, which ones do you have like one specific area that is more difficult to handle? Refrigerated as well.
I would probably put refrigerated up there, right? And that would probably be, it's probably the big need, right? It's when you move from a place like California where you're going to have heavy outbound, right? And how do you get it back into that area? But we utilize all that. I mean, everything that you just described is something that we probably use, probably not so much the drop trailers. But the answer to your question is yes. All those are an area of opportunity for us.
Sure. Well, Doug, I really appreciate you taking your time to talk today. I think there's so many more questions that if I was just a little bit quicker and wittier, I'd be able to come up on the spot right now, just because I think picking your brain on this subject is fascinating, especially for my audience. Like a lot of people are going to tune in on this interview to hear your perspective. So really appreciate you taking your time, Doug, and I hope we could potentially talk again on another podcast.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity and the time today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Doug.
All right.